definitions or even in our own practices of everyday life. What we're doing today probably is making sure that we understand where we are in relation to time. How is it that time isn't just a construct or something that passes away, but how can we use it meaningfully? How is something that's in the past not just passed on like, oh, it just happened, it's a bygone time, that we draw so much from it, that as scholars, we create by ourselves methods, oh my goodness, ethics, methods, so rigorous methods to study something meaningful. But on the concept of nostalgia, which everyone here can talk at length about, we are the meaningful method.
The idea was to open the vault on live international television.
I'm Geraldo Rivera, and you're about to witness a live television event. A massive concrete vault has been discovered. Some think it belonged to none other than the notorious Al Capone. Well, tonight, for the first time, that vault is going to be opened live.
When Geraldo Rivera, the host of the highest rated syndicated special in the history of American television, opens up with a promise to explode his way into the vault of America's most iconic mobster, Al Capone, 30 million viewers were glued to their television sets to find out what the mob boss had in store for the world. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sparks flew by, mimicking the gunshot effects you'd find in a Western shootout scene of a Star Wars B movie. For as long as it took Rivera to count those seconds, it took the construction workers an equal number of attempts to find a point, put explosive to it, and start the countdown all over again. To the amusement of everyone who tuned in then, now, and whatever YouTube will become in the future, this line remains a classic.
When all was said and done, all I'd found was an old stop sign and a couple of empty gin bottles.
That night, two groups of people certainly got drunk. Geraldo drinking away the sorrows of whatever's left of his career, and the rest of America. Nonetheless, time heals. I'm determined to argue that arguably the person who lost the most that day is today the person who can give us the most. Before Rivera performed an awkward dance off camera as part of a dare if nothing was found, which nothing substantial was, he left us with this honest feeling about the cruelty of time. It seems, at least up to now, that we've struck out with the vault. I'm disappointed about that, as I'm sure you are too. This is one time in my life that a pot of gold would have been a lot more fun than chasing the rainbows. Where most Americans were probably expecting something fascinating by the end of their viewing, Rivera was probably thinking about the views he would have had from his mansions and executive hotels that after this special, his career would have brought. Presumably, the pot of gold were the objects, any object in Al Capone's vault, and the rainbow was the reason why Mustache Man decided to spend his evening in a dusty basement with construction workers. It was his nostalgic objective to become famous of what became of an infamous man. This distinction between the rainbow, the nostalgic objective, what do I want, and the things we used to be nostalgic about that time, objects of nostalgia, how do I get there with what I have now, is the centerpiece of any time capsules. The moment we enter or encounter a time capsule, how do we know it is one? Regardless of whether it is intentional or dated, or whether they are accidental and undated, like the Titanic, whose 1912 voyage has since long ended, yet in spirit of film and recently in tragedy, cannot seem to stop coasting around in our imaginations of the sea. Somehow, we just know when it comes from and when it contains the past. What I'm asking here is this: how do we know what we are looking at is the past? The word here is nostalgia. When medical student Johann Hofer observed the conflicted, depressed state of Swiss mercenaries who left their families in villages, he put together the Greek nostos of returning home and algos of pain to capture the sickness of time, or what we now know as homesickness. Upon returning home, however, soldiers were cured of the nostalgia. Yet why is it that leeches were continued to be used as painful cures for this painful nostalgia? Or why a century after, the grave of French troops were marked with signs saying "Tuez par la nostalgie"? Or why is it that after 2 years of confinement at home, we're still nostalgic, or even more nostalgic because of it? Home is the answer? More importantly, with the internet, access to anything that was ever recorded has now meant that home is no longer set to a physical space, that there's more than one home. If the solution is no longer one thing, then what has become of this unchecked sickness, so to speak? Where and what has nostalgia mutated to become? What I'm interested here is if home is no longer able to be defined, then the next best thing we have from Hofer is that promise to return home, that returning, that like home, something like it, not of it. And where and what is the pain of doing that? Let me give you that argument with 3 questions. We as a collective right now are going to make a time capsule for 50 years. We're going to open it in the year 2074, ostensibly when I finish my PhD, Bart. That's not in the script. We have to ask at least 3 questions. First, how do we capture the 2020s as a past for the future openers of 2074? This is no easy task. Let's take it from question to question. First of all, how do we choose the tools to realize our nostalgic objective, that we want people to be nostalgic about our time, so that it remains legible and maybe even insightful for those 50 years from now? The same question was asked to a group of people in 1892 who were tasked with preserving a large rounded capstone that would allow for its audience to, quote, reflect on the past 39 years of construction, unquote, of the Salt Lake Temple in Utah, United States. After 128 years, an examiner in 2020 opened it, reflected it, and said, everything was very damp. Good start. And part of that is because they have dumped concrete around all the packets. And concrete will sweat and leach, and the books essentially were sponges. Ooh, what a shame. So they had the time they wanted to capture down. They had the objects they wanted to be contained in, but the method of capturing that as a past, legibly, insightfully, to preserve it, did not reach the end of Rivera's rainbow without a soak of pain, rain. Question 2. What items in our present moment of 2024 will capture the past for the future? What are the things that we can use to best capture the 2020s for folks in 50 years' time? Rather than drawing on the past, I would suggest that most folks here would draw on the very present now. 2020, of which nothing happened for 2 years, let's say. What items stood the test of time since 2020 and stayed relevant 4 years after today? The more iconic it is in our time, then perhaps the more recognizable it is in 50 years, right? If things are best presented in its natural state, like good food, then all we can say about the reception of the 2023 opening of the West Point Historic Time Capsule was that it was naturally funny. I'm laughing about it now. 1000 hours, August 28th, 100 military students and personnel gather around a hefty concrete box left by the graduating class close to 200 years ago. 34 minutes into the live stream and live ceremony, the expert goes,
The box didn't quite meet expectations. There is a layer of silt, that's what we were removing here, that settled in the bottom. As I mentioned before, the bottom had bowed out. It appears to have been from moisture penetration.
From moisture penetration. Ooh, what a word. That's 2 for water damage, 0 for Rivera Avengers United. Yes, a senior's prank is always funny, and yes, it stands the test of time, a good laugh. But does it really provide anything we don't already have in the present? The last question is therefore the most important before we even begin to talk about what our containers of time is and what kind of time we want to represent, to contain. Let's first talk about those items and how it's portrayed in our own times now. What is considered too old for now and too new for now? I have an easy answer for this. It's not what, it's whom. Who considers it? As a sociologist, I'm interested in how nostalgia reflects the way we try to capture and contain time by our commercial purchases. But in turn, how do these practices contain, habitualize, legalize the way we interact with time? We're not just only containing time, the concept around time, the policies around time, contain us too. Do not cut or change those trees. They're the property of blah blah National Park, of the blah blah committee, of the blah blah Council of United States of America. Ooh, 247 years is more important than the time immemorial of the first peoples, and whatever we learned, or however long it took us, to learn how to count time with our fingers. History is imposed over a biography. What would the trees, the fish, the sky, the ants, who are older than us by 140 million years, by the way, say about being cut, extracted, and shoved inside a time capsule because it represents a human period of 2020 to 2030? But this question is at the heart of it all. How do we know what is old, what is new, and as such, which objects of nostalgia is then most fitting to actualize that past? What is the time? What is the capsule? The nostalgic objective that contains and preoccupies us as we try to contain it. Svetlana Boym, writing on the future of nostalgia, poses the argument that the modern nostalgic is sick of home and homesick at once. With instant access to family, friends, and villages like Hofer's Swiss mercenaries were, that we once visited, was born in, or hope to visit one day with the internet, which home can we really return to? Our nostalgic objectives are in haywire, so we must turn to our objects for nostalgia that can provide the certainty to return home. Yet whose home are we returning to? Is this object nostalgic because it is personally from our past? Or is it because these objects come from a past that we are made to feel personal about? Fashion turns materials that are historically old to be new again. Retro is in, the mullet is now hip, and every fall we take our children to go shopping back in school. And what is new can instantly become old as well. Just think about when the 2023 Barbie movie came out and everyone in the world who had a pink shirt also. They were everywhere. Movie franchise revivals, Disneyland parks, subscription services, video games and products empires, the list goes on. What is home? Where is home? What we have here is not a nostalgia that is understood by Hofer to be a sickness of not being able to go home. It is a sickness of not knowing where home is, where everything around us is made to feel like home. Have we ever left? Where did we go? Did we grow? Where can we grow from? It is a confusion that rests very much in the present, not in the past. Boym calls this confusion chronophobia, which is not the fear of time, but the knowledge that so much time has already naturally passed, which we cannot get back. So when we yearn for things in the past, we are wasting time to try to realize it, to go back to it, to recreate it. If nothing comes out of this revisiting of the past, nothing we can bring back, then it's a lose-lose situation. We wasted more time to capture a time that's already gone. Chronophobia is therefore the anxiety to use what we have left meaningfully, her words. This is why nostalgic ready-made bottles, mass-produced, contained in reliable material that will never face water damage, and dictated by companies of being new or being old, this is the time capsule that we all use regularly. There's nothing wrong with it. It provides us with instant reorientation and justification of already having wasted time to think about spending time to bring that time back. So following Boym, one is not nostalgic for the past for the way it was, but for the way it could have been. Sit with that for a while. Our indulgence in these bottles is comparable to that of Rivera's nostalgic objectives to become famous. And the only object of nostalgia he was able to use is the bottle of whiskey in the vault. Both can get you drunk with the pursuit of a past that was and could have been. Therefore, we must rely on creative nostalgia, which was Boym's vague but parting gift that has stuck with me. She mentioned it once in her Future of Nostalgia, page 351, and never talks about it again. Contrary to collective nostalgia that is commercially produced and defined, creative nostalgia focuses on an individual's capturing of their personal experience of time. There is a specific time that is captured with a specific capsule that only one of which exists. It is personal all the way through. One such bottle is Kelly Day's. Hi, Kelly. Whose fairy tale book as an object, which you can visit later in the research creation hour, by the way, is an object of nostalgia, but also telling us about her nostalgic objective to dream away, like many of us do, to leave the traumatic and anxiety-driven relationship of a person in her family. Or Ainsley Leggett, whose video piece capturing herself and her children following the peanut butter ball recipe of an aunt they never met reveals the personal loss of a loved one, but also the personal way of dealing with that loss that many of us can individually relate to. or per Esther Clark's, made by the bottle, of which we can be inspired from too. If these creative nostalgias were collective or commercial ones, they would have been sold to us as an extremely satisfying life simulator where one can control their childhood with the cost of $9.99 for the ability to unlock siblings and $20 to change households, or a microwavable pie with the word aunt on it. Yet the creative nostalgia route provides us with something specific to our personal past, and thus the use of it in the present and for the future is personal all the way through. The commercial works too. I'm not critiquing that. I know you love mass culture. I do too. And many of us would have bought it and bought on. But it gives us a past that's not really specific, not generative, or not generative enough, in my opinion, to it. It's only culturally familiar, not personally specific. The difference between these two models is that creative nostalgia talks about personal loss, but gives so much in the present and for the future because it is personal. Whilst commercial nostalgia personalizes losses that keeps us contained in the practice of literally buying time. This is to say that neither one is better than the other. We live beside a nostalgia that media scholar Katharine Niemeyer, UCAM, calls is and was a business. What is important for us at the Gnostica Network is to explore that creative side of nostalgia, how we can use things we look from the past to inform and better our present days and nostalgic pursuits for the future. Unlike Boehm, who writes on the future of nostalgia, we're not talking about the future of the concept of nostalgia. No. We're talking about how we can use nostalgia for the future. After all, it does not take a pot of gold to summon a rainbow. We don't need Al Capone's things to make a vault an Al Capone vault the way it was. We just need a rainbow pointing somewhere. The nostalgic objective, the intention to make any vault one that could have been his. Now that we have the creative nostalgia, the creative key to dealing with time generatively, let's make sure not to lock ourselves in it. What we do now by using the past is the creation of a time capsule that we and others will open and hopefully draw from in the future for that future. That future is what the Gnostica Network believes in. That future should be what encapsulates us to live more meaningfully, not boringly, of time. The work of that future is today. That future is now. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So a symposium like that is a labor of love from the organizer, but also the presenter. So thank you so much for showing up this early, a Friday morning. So our first panel today is music and sound. I'm going to present